Judge Velther stood before the assembled group of humans and Cytherians in the main conference room. The formal announcement of the competitive assessment results had drawn crew members from both species, who wanted to witness this historic moment. Jake sat in the front row feeling nervous about what the judge might say. The competitive assessment between human Jake Martinez and Cytherian, Zaylara, has produced unprecedented results, Judge Velther announced. Traditional scoring methods are insufficient to properly evaluate the demonstrated capabilities because both participants showed superior performance in different cognitive areas. Jake looked around the room and saw that Captain Torres and Dr. Brooks were sitting forward in their chairs with obvious tension. The Cytherian delegation members had their skin patterns shifting through various colors that Jake was beginning to recognize as signs of intense interest or excitement. Human participant demonstrated innovative problem-solving, emotional intelligence, and adaptive thinking that exceeded our analytical models, the judge continued. Cytherian participant demonstrated superior mathematical precision, logical analysis, and systematic optimization as expected. However, the human approaches reveal cognitive capabilities that our species had not previously encountered. Observer, Kethran stepped forward to address the group. These results require extended analysis and discussion among our scientific council. We request permission to establish temporary research protocols to better understand human cognitive patterns. Captain Torres stood up. What kind of research protocols are you referring to? Zaylara moved gracefully to the center of the room, and her skin patterns shifted to colors that Jake now associated with excitement or curiosity. We wish to observe human crew members performing normal duties and problem-solving tasks. Your species processes information in ways that challenge our understanding of intelligence and cognitive function. Dr. Brooks consulted her tablet quickly. Are you saying that the competitive assessment has raised new questions rather than providing clear answers? That is correct, Zaylara replied. Human Jake Martinez solved problems using methods that our mathematical models cannot predict or replicate. His solutions were often superior to systematic approaches, despite appearing illogical by our standards. Jake finally found his voice. So what does this mean for the original challenge? Have I won or lost? Judge Velther made sounds that the translator interpreted as thoughtful consideration. The traditional concepts of winning and losing do not apply to these results. Your species has demonstrated cognitive abilities that are different from rather than inferior to Cytherian capabilities. This requires reclassification of previous assumptions about intellectual development. Captain Torres looked confused. Are you saying that humans will not be classified as intellectually inferior? We are saying that current classification systems are inadequate for evaluating human cognitive abilities, Observer Kethran explained. Your species appears to have developed intelligence along different pathways than any previously encountered. This discovery has significant implications for our understanding of mental evolution. Over the following days, Jake found himself working closely with Zaylara and other members of the Cytherian delegation. What had started as a formal challenge had transformed into an informal cultural and scientific exchange. The aliens were genuinely fascinated by human thinking patterns and wanted to observe everything from routine maintenance procedures to creative problem-solving sessions. Jake was assigned to guide Zaylara through various areas of the ship and explain how humans approach different types of work. She seemed particularly interested in situations where crew members had to make quick decisions with incomplete information or find creative solutions to unexpected problems. During a visit to the engineering section, Chief Engineer Ryan Clark was troubleshooting a malfunction in the ship's navigation system. The diagnostic computers had identified several possible causes, but could not determine which was actually responsible for the problem. Ryan examined the data for a few minutes, then walked directly to a specific control panel and made an adjustment that fixed the issue immediately. Zaylara's skin pattern shifted to deep blues and purples. How did Engineer Clark determine the correct solution without testing each possibility systematically? Jake watched Ryan work and tried to explain what he had observed. Ryan has years of experience with these systems. He probably recognized patterns in the symptoms that reminded him of similar problems from the past. Humans often use intuition based on experience to solve problems quickly. But how can pattern recognition function without complete analysis of all variables? Zaylara asked. What if his intuitive assessment was incorrect? Ryan overheard the conversation and joined them. Sometimes you have to trust your gut feelings about what is wrong. I have seen this type of symptom pattern before, and 9 times out of 10, it means the same thing. Taking time to test everything systematically might work, but it also takes longer, and sometimes we need quick solutions. Zaylara spent several minutes examining the navigation system and trying to understand how Ryan had reached his conclusion so quickly. Your species appears comfortable making decisions with high uncertainty levels. This approach seems inefficient but produces successful outcomes. Jake began to understand that the Catherians were discovering something about human cognition that surprised them. Their own thinking was highly systematic and logical, but humans seemed to excel at making intuitive leaps and finding creative solutions that pure logic might miss. Later that day, Jake brought Zaylara to the recreation area where several crew members were engaged in various leisure activities. Pilot Amanda Foster was playing guitar and singing, while others listened or joined in with harmony vocals. Communications specialist Ben Carter was working on a puzzle that involved arranging colored pieces into complex patterns. Zaylara observed these activities with obvious fascination. These tasks serve no practical function for ship operations. Why do humans engage in such behaviors? We call them hobbies or recreation, Jake explained. They help us relax, and sometimes they exercise different parts of our minds. Creative activities like music and puzzles can actually improve our problem-solving abilities in other areas. Amanda finished her song and noticed Zaylara watching. Would you like to try playing something? She offered and held out the guitar. Zaylara examined the instrument carefully and attempted to reproduce the chord progressions she had observed. Her movements were precise and technically correct, but the music sounded mechanical and lacked the emotional expression that Amanda had demonstrated. This is difficult, Zaylara admitted after several attempts. I can replicate the proper finger positions and timing, but cannot produce the same aesthetic quality. What additional factor is required? Amanda smiled and sat beside Zaylara. Music is not just about playing the right notes at the right time. You have to put emotion and feeling into it. Each song tells a story or expresses something about how the musician feels. How does one incorporate emotion into a mathematical sequence of sound frequencies? Zaylara asked. Jake realized this was another example of human capabilities that the Catherians found difficult to understand. Humans do not separate emotion from thinking the way your species seems to. Our feelings and our logic work together to help us understand the world. Over the next few days, similar interactions occurred throughout the ship. Catherians observed human crew members solving problems, making decisions, and engaging in creative activities. Each observation seemed to raise new questions of the nature of intelligence and cognitive development. Dr. Brooks reported that the Catherians were sharing their observations with their home world and receiving requests for additional information about human thinking patterns. They seem to view us as a completely new type of intelligent species, she told Captain Torres. Their scientists are very excited about the implications for understanding consciousness and cognitive evolution. Jake found his relationship with Zaylara changing as they spent more time together. She was no longer just the alien he had accidentally challenged, but had become something like a colleague and friend. Her curiosity about human nature was genuine, and her willingness to learn was impressive. Your species possesses capabilities that we had not imagined possible, Zaylara told Jake during one of their conversations. We are beginning to understand that intelligence can develop along multiple pathways, and that logical analysis is only one approach to understanding reality. Jake smiled. Maybe that is the real value of first contact between different species. We both learn new ways to think. about problems, and see the universe from different perspectives. The fourth challenge appeared on the holographic display, and Jake immediately understood why Zaylara looked confident. The test involved creative problem solving and required participants to find multiple solutions to complex scenarios using limited resources. Jake had expected this to be his strongest area, but the specific challenge was more difficult than anything he had imagined. The scenario presented a failing space station with critical system failures occurring throughout the structure. The station held 3,000 inhabitants, and conventional evacuation procedures would only save 60% of the population before the station's life support systems completely collapsed. Participants needed to find ways to save more lives. Using only the resources available on the station, Zaylara began her approach immediately with systematic analysis of all available systems and resources. She calculated power consumption rates, oxygen production capabilities, and structural integrity factors with impressive precision. Her solution involved optimizing evacuation procedures and redistributing power to extend life support duration by 12%. This would save an additional 360 lives, bringing the total survival rate to 72%. Jake watched her work and realized that her approach was methodical and thorough, but completely conventional. She was finding the best possible solution using established procedures and optimization techniques. Her answer was mathematically elegant and would definitely work, but it did not push beyond traditional thinking patterns. When Jake's turn came, he stared at the scenario display and tried to think differently about the problem. Instead of accepting the limitations of conventional evacuation procedures, he began looking for ways to change the fundamental assumptions of the scenario. What if the failing systems could be repurposed instead of simply managed? What if resources could be used in ways they were never intended for? Jake started with the station's waste recycling system, which was still functioning normally. Instead of using it only for waste processing, he realized it could be modified to produce additional breathable atmosphere by breaking down organic waste materials more aggressively. This will require shutting down other systems to provide extra power, but it could extend life support by 20% rather than 12%. Next, he looked at the station's industrial fabrication units, which were scheduled to be shut down during the emergency to conserve power. Jake realized these units could be reprogrammed to manufacture emergency life support equipment using raw materials from the station's construction supplies. The equipment would be crude and temporary, but it could sustain additional people during the extended evacuation period. His most creative solution involved using the station's artificial gravity generators in reverse. Instead of maintaining normal gravity throughout the station, he proposed creating zero-gravity zones in specific areas. This will reduce the physical stress on the station's failing structural supports and allow more time for evacuation. It would also make it easier to move injured or elderly inhabitants who might otherwise slow down the evacuation process. Jake's approach required shutting down multiple systems and using equipment in ways it was never designed for. The solutions were unconventional and involved significant risks, but his calculations showed they could potentially save 85% of the station's population. This represented an additional 390 lives compared to Zaylara's solution. Observer Kethran studied both sets of solutions carefully before announcing the results. Human participant demonstrates innovative resource utilization and unconventional problem-solving approaches. Kitherian participant demonstrates optimal systematic analysis and risk management. Both solutions are viable, but achieve different survival rates. Judge Velther examined the technical details of Jake's proposal. Human solution involves higher risk factors and relies on untested equipment modifications. However, mathematical projections support claimed survival improvements. Zaylara's skin patterns had shifted to colors Jake had never seen before. The silver markings on her face were moving in rapid, complex patterns that seemed to indicate intense thought or possibly confusion. She approached Jake after the results were announced. Your solution uses systems in ways that violate their intended design parameters. she said. How did you determine that such modifications would be successful? Without proper testing and validation. Jake considered his answer carefully. Human problem solving often involves taking calculated risks and making intuitive leaps. We look for creative ways to use available resources, even if those ways are unconventional. Sometimes the best solutions come from thinking outside normal boundaries. But how do you know your intuitive leaps are correct? Zaylara asked. What if your unconventional approach fails and results in worse outcomes than systematic optimization? That is always a risk, Jake admitted. But sometimes playing it safe guarantees failure, while taking risks offers the possibility of much better results. Humans have learned to balance caution with creativity. Zaylara was quiet for several moments while her skin patterns continued shifting through various colors. Your species approaches problems in ways we have never encountered. This is unexpected and requires further analysis. The fifth and final challenge was the most complex yet. It presented a first contact scenario involving a hostile alien species that communicated through emotional states rather than logical discourse. The species had superior military technology, but seemed open to peaceful resolution if the right approach could be found. Every attempt at logical communication had failed, and the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Jake read through the scenario details and realized this was exactly the type of problem where human thinking might have significant advantages. The hostile species made decisions based on emotions and feelings rather than rational analysis. Understanding their perspective would require empathy and emotional intelligence rather than mathematical calculation. Zaylara began her approach by analyzing the technical specifications of the hostile species technology and calculating optimal defensive strategies. She developed detailed plans for military responses and evacuation procedures if negotiations failed. Her solutions were thorough and well-planned, but they focused entirely on logical responses to the threat. Jake took a completely different approach. Instead of treating the hostile species as an enemy to be defeated or defended, again he tried to understand their emotional motivations. According to the scenario data, they had been displaced from their homeworld by environmental disasters and were desperately searching for a new place to live. Their hostility seemed to come from fear and desperation rather than genuine aggression. Jake's solution involved acknowledging the alien's emotional state and responding with appropriate emotional signals. Instead of trying to negotiate through logical arguments, he proposed demonstrating empathy for their situation and offering concrete assistance with their refugee crisis. This approach required understanding that fear and desperation were driving their behavior and responding to those emotions directly. His plan involved offering to share resources and technology to help the hostile species establish settlements in uninhabited areas. It also included cultural exchange programs to build trust and understanding between the species. The approach was risky because it required showing vulnerability and trusting beings who had demonstrated hostile intentions. When both participants had completed their solutions, Judge Velter reviewed the results with obvious interest. Kitherian participant has developed comprehensive defensive and strategic responses to hostile contact scenario. Human participant has developed emotional engagement and cooperative assistance protocols. Observer Kethrin studied Jake's solution more carefully. Human approach requires assumption that hostile species will respond positively to emotional engagement. This assumption cannot be verified through logical analysis. That is correct, Jake agreed. But sometimes taking emotional risks and showing trust can create positive outcomes that pure logic cannot achieve. Understanding other beings requires more than just analyzing their capabilities. It requires understanding their feelings and motivations. Zaylara looked at Jake with an expression he could not read. Her skin patterns were shifting through colors he had not seen during any of the previous challenges. Your species thinks with emotions as well as logic. We had not realized such an approach was possible for intelligent beings. Emotions are not the opposite of intelligence, Jake explained. They are another form of information that can be just as valuable as mathematical data. Understanding how others feel can be just as important as understanding how they think. The competitive assessment was complete, but Jake realized that something more significant had happened during the challenges. He had not just been competing against Zaylara, but had been demonstrating fundamental differences between human and Cytherian approaches to problem solving. The results would determine more than just his personal success or failure. Jake stood in the neutral meeting room staring at the strange devices the Cytherians had set up for the competitive assessment. The room had been cleared of all furniture and replaced with sleek alien equipment that hummed softly and displayed complex patterns of light. 3 large screens showed mathematical equations that shifted and changed every few seconds. Several smaller devices projected holographic images of geometric shapes that rotated slowly in the air. Zaylara entered the room followed by 2 other Cytherians who Jake had not seen before. She moved with the same graceful precision he had. Observed through the viewing window, but up close her presence was even more impressive. Her skin patterns were more intricate than he had realized, and they seemed to respond to her emotions or thoughts in ways that were both beautiful and alien. "Human Jake Martinez," she said, and her voice through the translation device sounded formal, but not unfriendly. "I greet you for this competitive assessment. These are Observer Kethran and Judge Velther, who will monitor our challenges and ensure fairness in all testing procedures." Jake nodded respectfully to all 3 aliens. "I greet you as well, Zaylara. I want you to know that my original comment was not intended as a challenge. In human culture, compliments about appearance are usually just expressions of appreciation." Zaylara's skin pattern shifted to deeper blues and the silver markings moved faster across her face. "I understand this human custom has been explained to me by your cultural specialists. However, the words were spoken and heard according to our protocols. The challenge exists regardless of original intention." Observer Kethran stepped forward and gestured toward the testing equipment. "The competitive assessment will consist of 5 separate challenges designed to measure different aspects of cognitive ability: mathematical reasoning, logical analysis, strategic planning, creative problem solving, and adaptive thinking under pressure. Each challenge will be timed and scored according to established Cytherian standards," Judge Velther added. "Both participants will attempt the same tasks, and results will be compared to determine relative intellectual capacity." Jake looked around the room at all the alien technology and felt a wave of nervousness wash over him. What happens if I lose? If you demonstrate inferior cognitive ability, then your species will be classified as intellectually limited in our records, Zaylara explained. This information will be shared with other members of the galactic community as required by our information sharing agreements. "And if I win?" Jake asked. Zaylara's skin pattern shifted again, and Jake thought he detected something that might have been surprise or curiosity. "That outcome has not been considered likely. However, if you demonstrate superior cognitive ability, then humans will be classified as intellectually advanced and will be invited to participate in galactic scientific and strategic councils." Observer Kethran activated one of the devices, and a holographic display appeared showing the first challenge. "We will begin with mathematical reasoning. Each participant must solve a series of equations of increasing complexity. Time and accuracy will both be measured." Jake approached the testing station and saw that the equations were unlike anything from human mathematics. The symbols were alien, and the relationships between numbers seemed to follow rules he did not understand. He looked at Zaylara, who was already studying the display with intense concentration. "Wait," Jake said. "How am I supposed to solve equations using mathematical systems I have never seen before?" Judge Velther made a sound that the translator interpreted as mild amusement. "The mathematical principles are universal. The symbols are merely different representations of the same fundamental relationships. Intelligent beings should be able to adapt to new symbolic systems quickly." Jake stared at the first equation and tried to identify patterns in the alien symbols. After several minutes of careful observation, he began to see that certain symbols appeared to represent basic operations, like addition and multiplication. The number system seemed to be based on 12 rather than 10, but the underlying logic was recognizable. Zaylara had already solved the first 3 equations while Jake was still working on understanding the symbolic system. Her movements were quick and precise as she manipulated the holographic interface to input her answers. The alien mathematics seemed as natural to her as breathing. Jake finally completed the first equation and moved on to the second. The problems became increasingly complex and required not just calculation, but also pattern recognition and logical deduction. He found himself falling further behind Zaylara with each question, but he refused to give up. Time remaining is 30%. Observer Kethron announced. Jake focused harder and tried to work faster. He had always been good at mathematics in school, but this was unlike anything he had encountered before. The alien mathematical concepts seemed to incorporate spatial relationships and temporal dynamics that human math rarely considered. Yet somehow the underlying logic was familiar enough that he could work through the problems step by step. When time expired, Jake had completed 6 of the 10 equations, while Zaylara had solved all 10 with perfect accuracy. The results were displayed on the main screen, showing her clear victory in the first challenge. Mathematical reasoning assessment complete, Judge Velther announced. Kitherian participant demonstrates superior performance in calculation speed, symbol recognition, and complex problem solving. Jake felt disappointed but not surprised. He had expected the aliens to have advantages in pure mathematical ability. Given their advanced technology, the real test would be whether human cognitive abilities offered any advantages in other areas. The second challenge involved logical analysis and required both participants to identify flaws in reasoning and construct valid arguments from given premises. This test used language and concepts that were more familiar to Jake, and he found himself able to compete more effectively. Zaylara approached logical problems with systematic precision, examining each premise carefully and following chains of reasoning step by step. Jake noticed that she seemed uncomfortable when problems required making assumptions or filling in gaps in information. Her thinking was extremely thorough, but also somewhat rigid. Jake took a different approach, using intuition and pattern recognition to identify probable solutions quickly, and then working backwards to construct logical justifications. This method allowed him to complete more problems in the allotted time, even though his reasoning was less systematic than Zaylara. Logical analysis assessment complete. Judge Velther announced when time expired. Results show comparable performance with different methodological approaches. Kitherian participant demonstrates superior systematic analysis. Human participant demonstrates superior intuitive reasoning. Jake felt a spark of hope. He had not won the second challenge, but he had proven that human thinking offered some advantages over pure logical analysis. Zaylara seemed to notice this as well, because her skin pattern shifted to colors Jake had not seen before, and she looked at him with what appeared to be increased interest. The third challenge involved strategic planning and required participants to develop solutions for complex scenarios with multiple variables and competing objectives. Jake found this test more engaging because it reminded him of strategy games he had played and military scenarios from his training. Zaylara excelled at identifying optimal solutions when all variables were known and could be calculated precisely. But Jake noticed that she struggled when scenarios involved unpredictable elements or required making decisions with incomplete information. Human strategic thinking seemed more comfortable with uncertainty and ambiguity. Strategic planning assessment complete, Judge Velther announced. Results show mixed performance patterns. Kitherian participant demonstrates superior optimization in controlled scenarios. Human participant demonstrates superior adaptation in uncertain conditions. Jake was beginning to understand something important about the differences between human and Cytherian thinking. The aliens were extremely good at logical analysis and mathematical calculation, but they seemed to have difficulty with creative leaps and intuitive problem solving. Human cognitive abilities might actually offer significant advantages in certain types of challenges. Zaylara approached Jake during the break between challenges. "Your thinking patterns are unlike anything in our databases," she said. "How do you reach correct conclusions without following proper logical procedures?" Jake smiled. "Sometimes the best solutions do not come from logic alone. Humans often use intuition and creativity to find answers that pure analysis might miss." Her skin patterns shifted to brighter colors, and Jake thought he detected something that might have been fascination. Captain Lisa Torres stared at Jake Martinez across her desk with an expression that could have frozen water. The emergency meeting had been called at 3 a.m. ship time, and everyone in the room looked tired except for the captain, who seemed wide awake and very unhappy. Jake sat in the uncomfortable metal chair feeling like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Captain Torres said in a voice that was deadly calm. "You were observing the Cytherian delegation during your assigned shift when you made a comment about one of their appearance. This comment was somehow heard by the aliens, despite the supposedly soundproof observation deck, and has now resulted in what they are calling a formal challenge." Jake nodded miserably. "Yes, Captain. I said she was gorgeous. I did not think they could hear me through the glass." Dr. Helen Brooks shifted in her chair and cleared her throat. She was the expedition's xenobiologist and had been studying the Cytherians since their arrival. Her usually neat hair was messy from being woken up, and she clutched a tablet filled with notes about alien behavior patterns. "Captain, the situation is more complicated than a simple misunderstanding," Dr. Brooks said. "I have been reviewing our cultural analysis data, and I am afraid Lieutenant Martinez has inadvertently triggered something very serious in Cytherian society." Chief Communications Officer Ben Carter leaned forward. "How serious are we talking about, Doctor? Can we just apologize and explain that it was a mistake?" Dr. Brooks shook her head and consulted her tablet. "Unfortunately, no. You see, Cytherian culture has some very specific beliefs about verbal acknowledgments of physical appearance. When someone comments on a Cytherian's beauty, they are not just making a casual observation. They are making a statement about that individual's intelligence and capabilities." Jake felt his stomach sink even lower. "What do you mean by capabilities?" "In Cytherian society, physical beauty is directly correlated with intellectual capacity and strategic thinking ability," Dr. Brooks explained. "The more beautiful a Cytherian is considered to be, the more intelligent and tactically skilled they are assumed to be. When you called this individual gorgeous, you were essentially saying that you believe you are more intelligent than she is." Captain Torres rubbed her temples. "So he challenged her to some kind of intellectual competition." "Exactly," Dr. Brooks confirmed. "And the individual he challenged is named Zaylara, which is as close as we can get to pronouncing her actual name. According to the delegation roster, she is their senior scientific advisor and military strategist. She is essentially their equivalent of a 4-star general, combined with their top scientists." Alex Stone, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, spoke up. "So Jake accidentally told their smartest person that he thinks he is smarter than her." "That is correct," Dr. Brooks said. "And according to Cytherian protocol, when such a challenge is issued, it must be answered. Zaylara has formally accepted what she perceives as Lieutenant Martinez's challenge and has requested what they call competitive assessment." Jake finally found his voice. "What exactly is competitive assessment?" Dr. Brooks consulted her notes. "Again, from what I can understand from their cultural files, it involves a series of tests designed to measure intellectual capacity, problem-solving ability, and strategic thinking. The tests are administered by neutral parties, and the results are considered binding by both participants." "Binding in what way?" Captain Torres asked. "If Lieutenant Martinez loses the challenge, then humanity will be classified as an inferior. Species in the Cytherian database, Dr. Brooks said quietly. This classification would be shared with other members of the galactic community and would effectively bar humans from joining any interstellar alliances or trade agreements. The room fell silent. Jake could hear the hum of the ship's engines and the soft beeping of various monitoring systems, but nobody spoke for several long moments. The weight of what Dr. Brooks had just said settled over everyone like a heavy blanket. You're telling me that because Jake called an alien pretty, we might be banned from joining galactic civilization? Captain Torres said slowly. That is essentially... Correct, Captain, Dr. Brooks replied. The Cytherians take these challenges very seriously. To them, it is not just about individual competition, but about the relative capabilities of entire species. Jake stood up abruptly and began pacing around the small conference room. This is insane. I just made a casual comment. I was not challenging anyone to anything. Can we not explain that humans sometimes complement appearance without meaning? Anything deeper. I have already tried that approach, Dr. Brooks said. I spoke with their cultural liaison and explained human social customs regarding compliments. Unfortunately, they view our explanation as an attempt to avoid the challenge, which only makes the situation worse. Communications Officer Carter checked his tablet. I have been monitoring their internal communications since this started. They are discussing the challenge extensively and seem very interested in the outcome. This is apparently the first time in their recorded history that another species has issued this type of challenge. What about the actual tests? Alex asked. What kinds of things will Jake have to do? Dr. Brooks scrolled through her notes. The challenges typically involve mathematical proofs, logical reasoning, strategic planning, and creative problem solving. They are designed to test multiple aspects of intelligence and thinking ability. Jake stopped pacing and looked at the assembled group. How am I supposed to compete with beings who are obviously more advanced than we are? They have faster than light travel and technology we can barely understand. Actually, that might not be as big a disadvantage as you think, Dr. Brooks said thoughtfully. I have been observing their behavior patterns and problem-solving approaches. The Cytherians are extremely logical and systematic in their thinking, but they seem to have difficulty with creative or intuitive solutions. Captain Torres leaned back in her chair. What do you mean by that? They approach every problem through careful analysis and mathematical calculation, Dr. Brooks explained. They are very good at finding optimal solutions when all the variables are known, but they struggle when they have to make intuitive leaps or think outside established parameters. So, you are saying that human creativity might actually be an advantage? Jake asked. It is possible, Dr. Brooks said. Humans have a tendency to find unconventional solutions to problems and to make intuitive connections that pure logic might miss. If the challenges involve situations where creative thinking is beneficial, then you might have a chance. Captain Torres stood up and walked to the window that showed the stars outside. When is this competitive assessment supposed to take place? Communications. Officer Carter checked his messages. According to the latest communication from their delegation, they want to begin the challenges in 6 hours. They are setting up testing areas on the neutral deck between our sections. 6 hours, Jake said. How am I supposed to prepare for something like this in 6 hours? Dr. Brooks closed her tablet and stood up. We will do everything we can to help you prepare. I will continue analyzing their thinking patterns and problem-solving approaches. Maybe we can identify specific areas where human cognitive abilities might give you an advantage. Captain Torres turned back to face the group. This is now our top priority. I want everyone working on this. Jake, you will spend the next 6 hours studying everything we know about Cytherian logic and reasoning. The rest of us will prepare backup plans in case this goes badly. Jake nodded, but his mind was racing. In 6 hours, he will be representing not just himself, but all of humanity in a contest of intelligence against one of the most advanced beings in the galaxy. The stakes could not be higher, and he had no idea if he was capable of rising to the challenge. What if I lose? Jake asked quietly. Captain Torres looked at him with an expression that was both stern and sympathetic. Then we deal with the consequences. But right now we focus on making sure that does not happen. Jake Martinez pressed his face closer to the thick glass window and stared down at the beings moving around in the lower deck. 3 days had passed since the alien ship had docked with their research vessel, and he still could not believe what he was seeing. Real aliens from another world were walking around just 30 feet below him. The observation deck was quiet except for the soft hum of air recyclers and the occasional beep from monitoring equipment. Jake had volunteered for the night shift, specifically so he could watch the visitors without crowds of other crew members getting in his way. Most of the crew was either sleeping or working in other parts of the ship during these late hours. The aliens called themselves Cytherians, and they looked nothing like the green little men from old movies that Jake had grown up watching. These beings were tall and graceful with skin that seemed to glow with a soft blue light. Strange silver patterns moved across their skin like water flowing over stones. Their heads were larger than human heads, and their eyes were huge and seemed to change color when the light hit them from different angles. Jake counted 8 of them in the viewing area below. They moved in ways that reminded him of dancers, or maybe swimmers moving through water. Everything they did seemed smooth and planned, like they never wasted any energy on unnecessary movements. When they talked to each other, their voices made musical sounds that the translation devices turned into words he could understand. One of the aliens caught his attention more than the others. She was standing near the center of the group and seemed to be explaining something to the others. Her skin patterns were more complex than the rest, and they shifted faster when she spoke. The silver markings on her arms and face formed designs that looked almost like writing, but changed too quickly for Jake to focus on any one pattern. She was beautiful in a way that Jake had never seen before. Not human beautiful, but something else entirely that made him want to keep looking at her. Her movements were precise but not stiff, and when she gestured, while speaking, her hands traced paths through the air that seemed almost like art. The blue glow of her skin was brighter than the others, and when she turned her head, the light caught the silver patterns and made them sparkle. Alex Stone walked into the observation deck carrying 2 cups of coffee. He was Jake's friend and the only other crew member who had volunteered for the night shift. Alex handed 1 cup to Jake and stood beside him at the viewing window. "Still watching them," Alex said, and took a sip of his coffee. "You have been up here every night since they arrived." "They are amazing," Jake replied, without taking his eyes off the group below. "Look how they move and interact with each other. Everything they do seems so purposeful." Alex nodded and looked down at the aliens. "The captain says they are some kind of scientific delegation. They are here to study us just like we are studying them. First official contact between our species and all that." Jake watched as the female alien he had been observing gestured towards something outside his view. The other aliens turned to look in the direction she was pointing, and several of them made those musical sounds that meant they were discussing something important. Her skin patterns shifted to deeper blues, and the silver markings moved faster across her arms. "That one there," Jake said and pointed toward the female. "She seems to be in charge, or at least very important to their group. Watch how the others pay attention when she speaks." Alex squinted through the glass. "Which one are you talking about? They all look pretty similar to me." "The one in the center with the brighter skin patterns," Jake said. "She has been doing most of the talking, and the others keep looking to her. FO direction. I think she might be their leader or maybe their chief scientist." The alien woman turned slightly, and Jake got a better view of her profile. The bone structure of her face was elegant and alien, but somehow familiar at the same time. Her large eyes reflected the lights in the room below and seemed to hold an intelligence that Jake found fascinating. When she spoke, her voice had harmonics that the human voices never had, and even through the translation device, it sounded musical. "What a gorgeous girl," Jake whispered without thinking about his words. The moment the words left his mouth, Jake realized he had spoken louder than he intended. The observation deck was designed to let crew members watch the aliens without disturbing them, but Jake was not sure how good the soundproofing really was. He had been told that the glass was specially treated to block sound from traveling in either direction, but he had never tested it. Alex looked at him with raised eyebrows. "Did you just call an alien gorgeous?" Before Jake could answer, something happened that made his stomach drop toward his feet. The female alien stopped speaking to her companions and turned her large opalescent eyes directly toward the observation window. She was looking straight at Jake through the glass with an expression that he could not read, but which seemed very focused and intent. "Oh no," Jake said under his breath. "Can she hear me?" The alien continued to stare up at the observation window. Her skin patterns shifted to darker blues and purples, and the silver markings on her face seemed to pulse with a rhythm that Jake had not seen before. The other aliens noticed her change in behavior and turned to see what had captured her attention. Soon all 8 of them were looking up toward the viewing window. "I think she heard you," Alex said, and stepped back from the glass. The briefing material said they have enhanced hearing capabilities, much better than human ears. Jake felt his face growing hot with embarrassment. He had been told that the aliens had superior senses, but he had not really thought about what that meant in practical terms. If she could hear him through supposedly soundproof glass, then she had definitely heard his comment about her appearance. The female alien said something to her companions in their musical language. Jake could hear the translation device processing her words, but the delay seemed longer than usual, as if the machine was having trouble finding appropriate human words for whatever she had said. When the translation finally came through the speakers, it made Jake's embarrassment turn into something closer to panic. "The human observer has made a verbal acknowledgement of physical assessment," the mechanical voice announced. "This requires formal response according to Protocol 7. Jake had no idea what Protocol 7 meant, but it sounded official and important. The other aliens began making excited musical sounds, and their skin patterns shifted to brighter colors. They seemed agitated, or maybe excited about something, and they kept looking between their companion and the observation window. "What did I just do?" Jake asked Alex, but his friend looked just as confused as he felt. The female alien spoke again, and this time her voice had a different quality to it, more formal and with longer pauses between words. "I acknowledge the challenge issued by the human observer. I accept the terms as stated and request formal arrangement of competitive assessment. Challenge." The word hit Jake like a physical blow. Somehow his innocent comment about her appearance had been interpreted as some kind of challenge. He had no idea what competitive assessment meant, but it did not sound good. Alex grabbed Jake's arm. "We need to report this to the captain immediately." Jake nodded, but could not take his eyes off the alien woman who was still looking directly at him through the glass. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her gaze that seemed almost curious, as if she was studying him the same way he had been studying her. "What have I done?" Jake whispered as Alex pulled him toward the door.